Courtland Simmons with you here at the CS Racing Report with the Preakness Stakes recap, and what a Preakness Stakes it was, to quote Larry Comas. These two are putting on a show, and that's exactly what SWISS SKYDIVER and Authentic did as they streak clear of the competition in a race in which, in the early going, Authentic stablemate, 1,000 words set the fractions, first quarter 24.48. Then Authentic asserted himself to lead at the half, which was running 47.65. And then at the 3/4 mark, something happened. And Robbie Alvarado, subbing for Tyler Gaffalione, made the move that wasn't made by Gaffalione in the Kentucky Oaks when the opening on the inside emerged. He darted through the inside at the 3/4 mark, which was running 111.24, and made a race of it with Authentic. And to quote Charles C. Canty's description of the '89 Classic between Easygoer and Sunday Silence, these two horses ding-dong down the stretch as they cleared the opposition, running a tremendous stretch run in a race in which the final time was 153.1 seconds in standard time, 153.28 in digital, 1/5 of a second off of Secretariat's 153 flat, in a sparkling performance by both horses, a race in which SWISS SKYDIVER, in making that inside move after tracking in 4th or 5th around the first early going, accelerated beautifully on the inside on the rail, was game, was never headed in the stretch by Authentic, who, of course, as I aforementioned, tracked 1,000 words, led briefly on the backside, went into top gear beautifully, made a last surge in the last 50 yards or so against SWISS SKYDIVER as the two engaged in battle, just missed. That was my description of his performance against SWISS SKYDIVER. In the meantime, you can collectively use two words to describe the rest of the field. No match for the top two. That's the only description that you really need to give to the opponents in here without going into a long dissertation. Two things that did happen. Pneumatic, who looked like he was going to briefly threaten on the turn, completely went empty. Art Collector was considered by many to have so much impact by not being in the Kentucky Derby, and that he would impact this race, show his versatility. I certainly thought that he would at least do that. He had nothing really, he had no resistance, or he was just couldn't keep up with these horses. And again, before everybody launches into what I think is the impending narrative, which is that the 8 weeks is maybe the reason why he didn't run so well. Well, of course, we covered that in the preview pod between him and 1,000 words, that the 8 weeks could be adverse to him, and perhaps that could be the case. But to be quite honest with you, I think the real problem was you had two incredibly fast horses up front, just leaving the rest of the field in the dust. And I'm pretty sure that right now that the area Baltimore area hospitals are filled with thoroughbreds being treated for third-degree burns, because these horses were marinated, roasted, and fried and torched on the grill by SWISS SKYDIVER and Authentic. They got completely blitzed and blown out in this race, and Art Collector was definitely among the victims. And again, the only thing about Art Collector that you can maybe attune this to or chalk it up to, maybe the 8 weeks hurt him. 1,000 words didn't run well either off the 8 weeks. And one thing we can all agree on, no matter what the variables may be, is that if he were to enter the Breeders' Cup Classic, which is a possibility, he's definitely going to get a price. And maybe he can rebound and be a factor. He's still a nice horse, but again, he just really, really got royally. He got his head handed to him along with the rest in this field. Some of the other horses, their failure to answer the questions that a lot of us or a lot of you have had going into the Derby and even going into this race shouldn't surprise anybody. That being Max Player and New York Traffic. I think there were a lot of questions that, as I said before, I don't think people are surprised that they got a non-answer. And as far as Mr. Big News goes, maybe along with Pneumatic and Art Collector, a bit of a disappointment. I thought he would at least hit the board. He didn't quite fill the exotics. Max Player, as aforementioned, seems to be missing out on these exotics for whatever reason. But again, back to the first two. This is a race where there's some interesting turns and twists. When Bob Baffert was going for the Triple Crown in 2002 with the War Emblem, Kenny McPeek foiled that bid with the longest shot to win the Belmont Stakes in Sarava at 70-1. And then another interesting variable in all this is that in 2007, Street Sense came in as the Derby winner, ran a better race than he did in Louisville, ran a 153 and change, but was edged out at the wire by Curlin, who was third 2 weeks before in the Derby, in a race in which Street Sense, it looked like he was going to win by 2, and then Curlin saw him and then re-broke like Silver Charm and re-rallied to get the win by that scant nose that year. Another tie-in directly with Baffert is with I'll Have Another, nipped his Bodemeister in the 2012 edition, a race in which Bodemeister also ran better than he did when finishing second to I'll Have Another in Louisville. Fantastic performance, just nipped at the wire by the Derby winner in 2012. This loss, of course, snaps Baffert's 5-race winning streak with Derby winners that were able to win to the Preakness and then go on for the Triple Crown bid. That wouldn't have been the case in this reconstructed Classic Series with the pandemic. But he loses that winning streak is snapped. And then, of course, for Kenny McPeek, he and Swiss Skydiver stand in the winner's circle. The 6th filly to win the Preakness Stakes, and along with Rachel Alexander, they're basically the only pair to have won this classic in some 90-plus years since Nellie Morse back in 1924. In the meantime, in addition to going over and covering the also-rans and the brilliance of the winner and the runner-up, is the sort of the Eclipse Award Breeders' Cup Classic Distaff ramifications. For Swiss Skydiver, for those of you who think she's already the 3-year-old champion, this certainly is huge on her resume. For those who believe because she lost the most important race for fillies to Kentucky Oaks, this certainly makes up for it. But She Dares the Devil is 1-to-1 head-on and head-on matchups, 1-to-1 head-to-head matchups with Swiss Skydiver. So, for Brad Cox, even though this may not be his primary concern, I think the only way She Dares the Devil, number one, has to prove to some that her Oaks win wasn't a fluke, and number two, in doing so, she could possibly wrest the 3-year-old championship away from Swiss Skydiver if Swiss Skydiver goes back to fillies in the Distaff and She Dares the Devil wins that race. That's where She Dares the Devil could basically snatch it from Swiss Skydiver. That's a big ask, but it's possible that could come into the play. If Swiss Skydiver goes to the Classic and runs top 3, then I think that is going to trump, along with winning this Preakness against a good field and a great Derby winner, that's going to trump She Dares the Devil winning the Distaff, I believe, even with Monomoy Girl and some other great horses in there. I think most people would agree with that. As for Authentic, I believe that he needed to win this race to, number one, dispel the doubts about his Derby win, and number two, put extreme pressure on Tiz the Law, knowing he has head-to-head that 1-0 advantage on Tiz the Law. Now things get a little bit tighter where if both horses get beat in the Classic, Authentic's going to have to run extremely well, like he did in this Preakness Stakes, minus the win, in order to prove that he's definitely better than Tiz the Law and he wins the 3-year-old championship. That's going to be tough against a very, very good field, which includes a couple Baffert runners that may make it to the starting gate for the Classic. On the other hand, if he wins outright, then he's the 3-year-old champion, and that the Preakness was just only a neck of a blip on his resume, and he only lost by a neck here, and he was well ahead of Jesus' team, who was 9 3/4 lengths back. As you look at the order of finish again, these two horses were well clear of everybody else, and I think the class and the cream rose to the top in this race. But of course, as we all know, if Tiz the Law wins the Classic, along with Authentic, if either one of those horses wins, we all know that it secures the 3-year-old championship, and then you start talking about the Horse of the Year conversation, of which Swiss Skydiver is also definitely putting herself into the mix with this Preakness win. A tremendous performance. Where does it rank? I believe that it's above Affirmed and Alydar simply because in that race, Stevie Cawthon, if you look at the tape, even without Stevie Cawthon's comments, that race was always under Affirm's control. Alydar made a tremendous charge to make up the ground, but Affirm was always in front, was never going to get past. So it's a little bit above that one. Some may disagree, but I think it's above that one. It's probably above the aforementioned 2007 because it wasn't a procured length-long stretch battle. Curlin was headed by Street Sense. Looked like I said he was going to win by 2, and then he came back on, which made for the drama of the end of that race. And it's a little bit better than Bodemeister and I'll Have Another, who ran down the aforementioned in the stretch of that race. But it's pretty close. But I think that it elevates itself above those, and it puts itself into the category of the best Preakness of all times, being Easy Goer and Sunday Silence, that ding-dong as Charles C. Canty described it, and right up there with sort of my co-best of all time, Silver Charm, Free House, Captain Bodget with Touch Gold right behind. Those, I think it really elevates itself up to that, minus the roar of the crowd with all the conditions and protocols. So this was a tremendous performance by the winner and the runner-up. I've said that 1,500 times, but I have nothing but great things to say about these two horses. What a tremendous horse race, as Swiss Skydiver goes into the history books, becomes the 6th filly to win the Preakness Stakes, beating Kentucky Derby winner Authentic by a neck, who was 9 3/4 lengths in front of the 3rd place Jesus team, in a time, the 2nd fastest Preakness ever, of 1:53.1. Standard time, 1:53.28. Swiss Skydiver, the super filly, the winner of the 2020 Preakness Stakes.